Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Good morning and welcome everyone to attending today's seminar. I'm Pat Heyer, Group Head for Commercial Banking here at People's State Bank. One of our goals is to provide educational events like this one to our customers and business community. We want to be known as a resource for you out there in the business community and make sure that you're able to thrive in your businesses. Today's presentation on cybersecurity is a topic we take very seriously at People's. We've seen cyber crimes hit many of our local businesses and attacks are skyrocketing across the nation. We want to make sure your business is protected as much as possible. Today's presentation is designed to get you thinking about cybercrime, where your greatest risks are, and where you can start. I'm happy to introduce Tim Dively, Chief Technology and Operating Officer here at People's State Bank. Tim will share for us 4 high-level strategies all businesses should consider to defend against cyber risks. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Pat. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Pat noted, I am the Chief Technology and Operating Officer at the bank. So one of my areas of responsibility is making sure we're doing everything we can to be proactive in protecting our customers' data as well as that of the bank. Some of the biggest risks I face every day are those in cyber attacks. I've been told I'm on the clock, which is completely necessary. Otherwise, I would be able to talk about these topics until the end of the day. So let's go ahead and get started, and I promise to stick to my script. While cyber attacks can come from a variety of places, I always emphasize the importance your employees have in protection as the first line of defense. While cyber attacks place huge burden of risk on each of us monetarily and reputationally, human error will continue to allow for successful campaigns by the bad actors in the world we live in today. Why do the bad actors continue to fish, vish, and smish us? Because it works. At People's, we're not a cybersecurity consulting firm, but we are part of a very heavily regulated industry that requires us to invest significant amount of money and resources into cybersecurity solutions to protect the information of those individuals and businesses that trust us with their information and with their finances. Not every industry has these levels of required controls in place, so it falls on each of you to protect yourselves, your data, and your customers' information. The topics we're going to cover today are not the end-all be-all, but they will provide you with enough to either validate where you currently are or to help you start your cybersecurity program. Since you're all in listen-only mode, I'd recommend you write down any questions that you have as I work through the topics to ask later. I'll provide you with my contact information at the end, or for those of you who are existing customers at People's, you can reach out to your banker as well. If you'd like a PDF of the presentation, please reach out to your banker or send an email to Treasury Management. We'll go ahead and provide that address towards the end of this. Also, as much as I'd love to avoid getting technical or geeking out in some of these areas, in many cases, I simply can't avoid it. It's the nature of the topic. Please don't worry if I mention something you have never heard of. Just write that item or word down and look it up later, or reach out to me afterwards and I'd be happy to talk with you about it. The presentation is covering a lot of complex areas that I could easily spend an hour on independently, but our audience includes a mix of businesses that have more mature programs and those who are just starting out. Oftentimes in these sorts of presentations, you walk out scared. That is not my intent at all. Some of these stories you hear are scary, sad, and even frustrating, but they're real. It is more important for us to understand what you can do to make it less scary with manageable steps to work towards. The fact that you're all here right now, you should be applauded because it does put you above the curve. The first area that we're going to talk about is system patching. System patching is also known as vulnerability patching. It's the formal process of making sure all of your systems, which will include computers, tablets, mobile phones, network equipment, physical security systems, etc., basically anything that connects to the internet or to your work network, along with applications that you use the most, have the most current vulnerability patches reviewed and installed by your organization. A patch is basically a piece of software that just plugs into something within the system that's been identified that could cause a risk of letting someone in to perform or load malicious code. Think of it like patching a leak in the inner tube. This slide represents the main systems that require patching, as noted a minute ago. The bottom section highlights the recommendations that I'll go through after the best practices are discussed. The main thing that needs to be patched is your network equipment. So your servers, your switches, your routers, wireless access points, things like that. Also your infrastructure systems. Those would be like your HVAC systems, security systems, or other devices that connect to the network. Your operating systems for all of your devices and standalone applications. You may have heard the term Internet of Things, or IoT. This is a term that describes physical objects that have sensors or some other hardware that allows it to connect and exchange data with either other devices or data via the internet or some other sort of communication network. The only reason I bring this up is because everything today is so connected. The fact that I can pull out my smartphone right now and see what's happening in my backyard through a camera is good for my own peace of mind, but it's just another way someone can compromise me. Most of you have likely heard the Target breach from 2013. There were 70 million credit card and debit card exposed in that, along with other PII, personally identifiable information, that was stolen. This data was obtained not by hacking Target's core system, but by hacking the HVAC system controls that was also connected to Target's core network. I'll touch on this a little later, but again, it's important to note because we really need to understand what all is connecting to our system. So working through the best practices in the system patching and vulnerability patching. My first item here is to inventory your systems. Systems that I'm referring to, again, are going to include computers, other hardware, and software. This can be as simple as keeping a spreadsheet. Many times, other organizations may refer to this as asset management. It simply involves capturing all the stuff you have. Just remember, when you decommission or replace something, make sure that you wipe the old device, properly dispose of it with all the information gone, and note that in the inventory along with whatever its replacement is. The next item is assigning risk levels to each system. The best rule of thumb in risk assessment is to identify the criticality of the resources to your operation. What's its impact, along with the probability that something could happen to that particular asset. Multiplying those two numbers together will give you a threat score. As you become more familiar with cybersecurity best practices, you may hear things like inherent risk and residual risk. Inherent risk is the risk at face value of the particular asset without any controls in place. Residual risk, on the other hand, is the remaining risk that exists after the controls are implemented, either through an established policy, a procedure, a process, or some third-party software that manages it. As an example, look at the wire transfer process that you currently have. Inherently, there's a high risk as you are talking about sending your money to someone else, requiring routing numbers, bank numbers, etc. However, if you have controls in place, such as dual control, account verification, separation of duties, passphrases, and PIN codes that are needed to complete the wire, the residual risk is actually lower. The next item that we have is consolidating software versions. Please do not keep multiple versions of the same application. This should be kind of caught during your inventory stage. For example, if you have multiple versions of Microsoft Office or Adobe within your organization, you will have to manage those separately. Whereas if you have the same version, you can patch all the resources across the board simultaneously in one fell swoop. It's just an efficiency. Keep up with vendor patch announcements, even if you partner with an IT firm to manage your vulnerability patches and apply those for you. I still recommend having someone within your organization sign up for notices for all the key systems, those that you've determined have a higher threat score, so you can verify. A common term you will hear in these best practices is trust but verify. The next item I've got is to mitigate patch exceptions. This should be done in some sort of review area. Remember, it's okay to not install a patch just because it's available if it's a lower risk to your organization. As part of this process, you should capture and track the patches as they come down. It's important when you get the alert that there's a vulnerability that's been identified and been exploited elsewhere to see what the impact is for your particular organization. There will be times when a vulnerability will be identified only if you have a particular setting or only if you use a particular function, but not anything outside of that. The problem by just ignoring those if they don't apply is because later, if you happen to turn that affected function on, then you've got the vulnerability. So you always want to just make sure that you do those, but you don't necessarily have to do them as soon as they become available. I think one parallel that I like to use to help determine what available vulnerabilities you can let go is to look at a recall on a vehicle as an example. Let's say you have a 2022 XYZ vehicle and there's a recall for the adaptive cruise control that can allow the radar not to sense a vehicle slowing down in front of you. Big deal, right? You don't want to run into that vehicle. You don't want to, cause some sort of issue because of that. But you have a 2022 XYZ vehicle, but only have the regular cruise control. So you don't need to take your vehicle back to the dealer to have them fix it because it actually doesn't apply to you. Hopefully that makes it a little bit easier to understand of what to put in right away and what it's okay to let go for a little bit. This may be one of the bigger items that we have out here is test your patches before applying them everywhere. There's always the possibility that applying a patch fixes the issue on that particular host that was identified, but it could actually cause something else to break. Most often this occurs when you have an operating system like Windows that has a patch that covers a shared file, which is a file that is used by multiple systems across other applications. The one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to simply get that patch and throw it out to all of your systems, not knowing what impact it could have. Generally, you're going to be okay, but it's that one time that you're going to wish that you had tested it in advance. So make sure that you're doing that before you roll it out to your entire organization. So as it relates to the recommendation that's at the bottom of the slide, so partner with a monitoring vendor, especially if you do not have technical expertise in-house. They can monitor your systems and let you know what's vulnerable and verify what's been patched. Check with whoever you partner with for your IT services. They may be able to provide this for you. Review all available patches as noted above. Again, you'll mitigate or assume the risk to the patches in this area, but you'll want to apply the rest. Track all activities. If you partner with a vendor, again, they should be able to provide this to you monthly. But if you're managing your own patching, you should, at a minimum, keep a spreadsheet to track your systems, such as the date the patch was available, the impacted systems, the date the patch was installed, or the reason the patch wasn't installed, why you assumed the risk. The most important in this area probably is simply to remain disciplined. This is probably the hardest part because it isn't fun and you can't see much return on the effort required. But I promise you, if you do have a breach because you are not committed to this, you'll be kicking yourself. Next, we're going to talk about next gen AV, which is antivirus, and anti-malware. So if you don't have real-time antivirus or anti-malware solutions within your systems, please look into these options. The three boxes in this slide indicate what I feel you should be looking for in a new solution, or for those of you that do have a solution such as this, to just verify that you have these in your current solution as well. So endpoint solution service. As it relates to the endpoint, what I mean by that is a remote computing device that communicates back and forth on a network to scan and identify known threats. Again, this is a clear example of geek speak that's with this. So with an endpoint detection and response system, this is something that will look at all the devices that are connected to the network. As soon as it finds something, it can automatically identify that, quarantine it, alert on the infection that made it into the system. Now, anything that has an endpoint solution, you or the firm who is monitoring it for you will be notified as soon as that threat is identified. Once that threat is identified, it's really important that you register the system that it's in, and your solution should do this for you. Once everything is calmed down a little bit, it's super important that you go back and find out, how did that even get in? What was that point of entry? By next gen, I mean next generation. So the old way of antivirus and anti-malware solutions that were out there, you're all probably familiar with. So historically, the antivirus solutions required each device, so every computer, to be manually updated with the most current virus definitions, or have a frequency where it looked for updates to be scheduled. The problem is, if just one device wasn't updated, your risk went through the roof. Viruses and malware are coming out by the minute. So this process would leave everyone at higher risk if you don't spend time refreshing and updating your definition files constantly. Most solutions that are out there would probably be classified as a next-gen antivirus solution. They would just require that you have a connection to the internet, or something in-house within your organization is getting those files to be able to push them to make sure that the definitions are updated. Reporting capabilities. Most solutions will provide you with monthly reporting to show how many viruses or malware were prevented and quarantined, which systems in particular were targeted, and things like that. This normally helps you know where to concentrate your effort. So when you start looking at those reports and you start looking to see where the stuff is being targeted, where those things are coming from, you can kind of pool your resources a little bit and focus on removing that risk from your situation. So the next steps as it relates to this is, it's completely overwhelming to think that you constantly have to put staffing behind gathering information, which is why I recommend you leverage an expert. We found for some of these little niche areas where expert knowledge is necessary, it is actually more cost effective to partner with another vendor who you know will keep in front of these things on your behalf. While I'm no manufacturing expert, I'd imagine that there are very few that don't go outside for other vendors for certain parts, meaning that they don't do everything in-house. Cybersecurity is no different. Earlier, I mentioned when a virus or malware is identified in your system, you need to first stop it, then determine its point of entry. This would include email filtering and scanning, as this is the most popular way things get in. All right, next we're going to talk about multi-factor authentication. Because passwords aren't good enough on their own anymore, there's a need for MFA, multi-factor authentication. Sometimes this can also be referred to as 2FA or two-factor authentication. MFA can be controlled with external applications by using biometrics, SMS text, etc. While I won't get into specific recommendations, I will say it's necessary for access to most systems that you have. So having MFA on critical applications such as email and productivity suites like Office 365 as an example is super important to have. You should not allow access to any of these systems with just the username and password from any unsecured network. For example, I would not recommend, if you have salespeople who are in the field that may be traveling, for them to connect to an unsecured network in an airport and just be able to access your system through a username and password. Your vulnerability, your risk goes through the roof when you have an unsecured network that's out there. If you currently allow access with just a username and password, make sure the password is either long or complex. Reach out to your vendors and ask if they offer MFA for access to their applications and their sites. We're also connected that if your vendor doesn't have these sorts of controls in place, they're actually putting you and your customers at risk. Ask your vendors what additional controls they have in place as part of your annual review. Enable multi-factor authentication on all channels of access, including mobile devices and tablets. Generally, when you land on a particular multi-factor authentication tool, you can install those across all other systems that you have out there. So it's not like you're having to do this for different situations, different applications for every single device that you have. While not specific to MFA, I do have some recommendations that align with this topic as controls to minimize the risk overall. Make sure you have clear separation of critical data from everyday data when possible. In an upcoming seminar, we'll talk about user access rights. It's important to note that you should only give people access to what they truly need to do their job. That way, if they happen to be compromised, the impact to your organization is significantly less. Keep privileged users to a minimum. These would be people that have admin rights, people that can install things on computers. Make sure that that's a very small and select group of people that can do that, and make sure that those admin IDs or privileged user IDs are actually separate from their normal user accounts. It just makes it more difficult to attack them if they have separate IDs that only allow them to do those certain functions. So let's go back and pick on Target again. Hackers first tried to hack Target's core system, but they being Target had some decent controls in place to help close down those attacks. So they moved on and went to the other connected devices and found that the HVAC system sat on their core network and had a really weak password. From there, the bad guys used the access to the HVAC system to jump over to the customer information data that wasn't segregated, and then they were able to gain access and steal it. The fact that those weren't separate, there's no reason for someone who was accessing an HVAC system would ever need customer information. And the fact that the username and password for that system was able to move data off that is absolutely baffling to me, but it's all too common. We should be able to do the easy things well, but too often you see that as missed. Whenever I talk with customers about this, I always reference water and basements. All it takes is one tiny area that doesn't slope away from the house or where an imperfection in the foundation may cause huge issues. Water is like hackers. It will find the weakest spot, regardless of how small it is, and cause significant damage. Virtual private networks, or VPN, coupled with MFA is going to be the standard in the next 6 to 8 months, I'm predicting. If you allow your employees to connect to unsecured networks, then you should require VPN in order to connect to your business. Let's touch on password complexity real quick in the next slide. All right, this is a busy slide, I get it, but this is a graphic provided by Hive Systems that shows why I made the comment earlier about how passwords aren't good enough anymore. I know we all have the same reaction when we get that dreaded alert that our password is going to expire, like, how am I going to think of a new one? Or, geez, I wish I had another kid, so I had another password available to me by using their name followed by 1, then 2, then 3. That'll buy me a year. Then they start requiring special characters, but not the special character I just put in there. It's totally frustrating, and I get it. So what do? We have a file on our computer called passwords, or we don't call it passwords, we call it not passwords, or something cute like vacation plans. No one would ever look there for my password, right? Wrong. If someone were able to get into your system, they would be able to pull over all your files and then scan them to see what the passwords are. My suggestion is to look at something like a password manager that generates passwords for you that you don't have to remember, that end up on the bottom right side of the slide that we're showing you right now, taking thousands or millions of years to crack. Again, I'd be happy to talk about how these can be effective and take the stress out of the changing passwords. But if you simply look at these figures here, along the left side, it's the number of characters. So how long is your password? Across the top, going left to right, that's showing the different complexity. So numbers only, letters only, and how quickly through some algorithm it would take for a bad actor to crack your password. Again, they tend to be lazy, so they want the quick fix on this. So if you have something that's small in characters, so it's a short password with only numbers or only letters, As you can see there, it's very easy to crack that. When you get to the more complex, there are year abbreviations there that I honestly don't even know what they are, something over 1 trillion years. But that just shows how long it would take to crack those. So finally, I'm going to suggest something that you might think is not very smart, but when looking at managing risk, it really is. Please, again, don't keep your passwords on a computer in a file, like in a Word doc or an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF. I would rather that you write these down on a piece of paper and stick them under your keyboard or in your drawer. Think about it. If your computer is connected to the internet, there's a high risk that if there is a vulnerability or you click on a link and put in your credentials, they then can take your files on your computer, including your Clever Vacation Plans Word document, and your passwords are stolen. Therefore, that bad actor would be able to access all of your accounts from anywhere in the world. If you have them on a piece of paper at your computer in your office, it is not ideal, but how many people come into your office in your town and are able to flip over your keyboard or open the drawer to look for your password? That number is significantly less. To be clear, I'm not telling you to write all your passwords on a piece of paper and stick them under your keyboard, but I am telling you having them physically written down really is much safer than having a file on your computer. All right, let's talk about employee training. All the solutions I presented are really great, but the largest risk to us all, as I noted in the very beginning, is human error. And that will forever be the largest risk. Because of this, many companies experience data breach or are infected with ransomware. In 2021, 1 in 5 small to mid-sized businesses reported a ransomware attack, and 43% of all data breaches in 2020 involved a small business. These are only breaches that have been identified and have been reported. So I would guess that there's actually more than that out there. The best way to combat all these items we've discussed today is to educate your employees on new trends, new risks, and on the expectation that your organization has that everyone shares in the responsibility to protect the organization, your finances, and your customers. So use a formal program that requires all new employees to get an overview of cybersecurity that's specific to your industry if there are certain rules or certain risks that are more where you're working out of. Make sure that you have at least annual training on the most critical cybersecurity topics for all of your employees to make sure that they are truly a good first line of defense. Test them. If you're able to invest in a formal phishing training program, it may allow you to do periodic testing. So as we go through the different topics here, there's some kind of odd words that are in here, but we'll go through what my recommendation is for training on these topics. So there's phishing, vishing, and smishing. So all of these are what are referred to as a category of social engineering. Phishing is going to be those emails that come through. Vishing is going to be voicemails or voice calls that are coming through. And smishing, as you can see on this slide, the SMS is capitalized. So those are going to be through text messages. Make sure that you've got good controls in place relating to things such as wire and ACH approval processes with your financial institution. Make sure you're training on this at least annually, but preferably quarterly. Phishing emails are much better than they used to be, so they're not as easy to differentiate between the real ones and the fake ones. There are more and more impersonation emails that come through that are effective in moving money because they appear to be legitimate. Those examples would be your CFO or someone who would normally originate a request for an ACH or a wire. The impersonation email would be, it would appear that it would come through from them, but there's something a little bit off with it. Either the name is just reflecting who the CFO is, but if you look at the email, it actually is coming from like a Gmail or a Yahoo account or something like that. So it's not truly coming. That's what we're talking about when we talk about impersonation emails. Voice calls and text messages are also better. So they too are harder to spot. So make sure we verify on any of those sort of requests that come through. Make sure your employees know the difference between spam and junk mail and phishing. Odds are if they signed up for a subscription for something and they're getting it, that is not a phishing attempt. That is something that they chose to get, and so that would be considered spam or junk mail. There's inherently very little risk in those things other than being annoying. Have a mechanism for your employees to report suspect emails. Focus on the red flags, things like strange language, a request that comes from a Gmail account like I had mentioned earlier, attachments that you wouldn't normally expect to see, links to websites that you normally wouldn't expect to see either. Those would be considered some of the red flags. Historically, it used to be really poor English used, language misspellings. They're much better now, so you can't just trust on that. Have a mechanism for your employees to report these suspected emails. I already mentioned that, so I'll skip down. Try to identify emails that come from outside the organization with a banner on them. For example, at the bank here, if we have something that comes outside of our organization from you as a customer, across the top, there will be a thing that says, hey, this came from outside of the bank. Make sure that you validate it, that it's legitimate, just so we know in case something was an impersonation email, it would have that banner as well. So we would kind of know right away, hey, there's a red flag. This is coming from someone internal, but it's saying that it's coming from someone external. With most email systems that exist out there, that's basically a feature that you can turn on. The top two industries drawing the most hacker heat in 2020 and 2021 were the construction industry and the manufacturing industry. That heat is either coming directly to these industries through these companies, or most notably through their supply chains. Since most smaller businesses don't have super robust systems, the bad actors think that they're easier targets. And you know what? Oftentimes they are. I had mentioned before that 43% of all data breaches involve small businesses. That's why that's happening. So I think the thing to note is that most of these successful attacks, no one needed to spend a ton of money to avoid them or to reduce the impact. And that was what I hope you understand by the end of this presentation. It's okay to verify or to question things. So the next area for employee training that is really important is data classification. So making sure everyone in your organization knows what information they have access to that contains PII or confidential information about your company, about your customers, about other partner information that's out there. This is why it's important to make sure that you do not have all of your data in one spot, as I mentioned earlier in the MFA slide. If you don't have your information segregated, such as the HVAC system with your employee benefit information, somebody gets into one of those areas, they've got access to everything. It's more work for them to do it if it's segregated. This is also why it's important to limit who has access to private or confidential information. If they don't need it for their job, they shouldn't have access to it. Removable mass storage devices. If you allow your employees to connect thumb drives to their work computers and move files, you should understand the risk. I'd recommend either disabling USB ports from allowing mass storage devices to connect and transfer files, allow only encrypted drives, or implement a DLP, a data loss prevention solution, in order to achieve this. Now, by doing this and disabling mass storage devices still means that people can charge their cell phones through those, so don't worry about that. For critically important information, you should be using Secure Upload Portal. I recognize many of these solutions are a lot less convenient than a thumb drive, but they are controls that minimize the risk. You do this for most other areas of your business, so you need to start thinking about doing it here as simply the cost of doing business. Who would have thunk that this one would have been on here? It wouldn't have been on here 3 years ago, but it's on here today. Working from home employee training. Make sure you find a training module that highlights controls and best practices that should be followed for your employees who are working from home. Some of the things that we note here is making sure that you've got a dedicated area for them to work. Generally, that's going to be a place where they can close the door. Make sure all files that are off premise at their home office are secured. Restrict the ability for them to print unless it's absolutely necessary. Require a VPN connection for connecting to any of your systems. Do not allow family to use the work equipment. That one is a lot tougher to implement than just putting it in a policy. I get that. While I didn't spend time specifically discussing ransomware, I will in future presentations. If you have any burning questions on ransomware, feel free to reach out to me after this. What I would say about ransomware is that it occurs when someone gets into your system files, generally through a phishing email, where an employee either unknowingly put in their credentials or visited a fake site or had an easy password to crack, and they encrypt your files and force you to pay to get the decryption key via cryptocurrency. Lots of new words in there, but unfortunately, it's the state that we live in today. But here's the deal. There's no guarantee with ransomware that once you pay, that the bad guys will actually decrypt the files. Nor is there any guarantee that they won't sell the information they have to cause a breach. This is where the separation of everyday data from critical data is important, and why only giving access to those who need it is also important. If those are in place and someone is able to trick one of your employees who doesn't have access to the critical data to put in their credentials and don't have admin rights, they're not going to be able to get good data, or they can't even encrypt the data because they don't have the access rights to do that. I know that this is a super technical explanation, but hopefully that makes a little sense. Finally, on the ransomware topic, make sure that you have a good backup solution and know what that is and what the gap that exists would be if you got ransomware attack in the middle of the day. So if you had to restore those files, how much customer information would you lose? How much processing information would you lose? How much inventory information would you lose? Encryption ransomware is less scary if you can restore something quickly and identify how the activity happened. Again, reach out if you want more details on this. So, congratulations, you made it to the end. And I hope you found some of this information valuable. A couple of highlights that I want to make here in closing, though, is don't feel you need to be an expert. Just align yourself with trusted partners. Also, don't feel you need to spend a fortune, but proactive spending is better than ransomware or reputational costs. You do not need to do this all at once. So in this slide, again, I've got some best practices and suggestions here. So make a plan, whether you already have cybersecurity defenses, a training program, or this is all brand new to you, just make a plan. Make the plan for 24 to 36 months out, and make sure you include budget dollars year over year for cybersecurity products and services, IT products and services, and education for your employees. Make sure you revisit the plan and see how things are going and adjust your plan as needed. This should be a living document, and it is not a set it and forget it sort of plan that you simply extend at the end of the year. The cybersecurity landscape changes too quickly to allow for that approach. Next, stay up to date with the cyber landscape. Find cybersecurity standards groups and individuals to follow on LinkedIn or other social media. Subscribe to newsletters from cybersecurity firms. Use tools like Flipboard to get information to sign up for vulnerability and patching notices from your vendors. I'd be happy to share what I look at every day. Gone are the days of cybersecurity on its own. We need to have cyber resilience through protection, awareness, preparedness, response, and recovery. Cyber resilience is more of a mature approach as it focuses on preventing threats from even making it into our systems. The more we can do to stop things from making it to you, the better. In 2020 through 2021, those companies who experienced a data breach or were hit with ransomware, it took on average 311 days before they realized that they were impacted. Imagine what could be done in 311 days by someone with unauthorized access to your system. Again, I'm not telling you these things to scare you or make you think that someone's in your systems right now, but it is data like this that we need to develop our own maturity. Educate and repeat. Education and leadership emphasis on the criticality of cybersecurity prevention is the most cost-effective thing you can do. Because your employees are your greatest risk of causing a breach, the more they understand the importance of what to look for, what to check, what to question, what to confirm, the better off we all are. While you continue to educate yourself and your employees, let us help you as well. We intend on adding more of these sessions as long as you all find them beneficial. Also, as I mentioned before, please feel free to reach out to me specifically if you have any questions, or I can help you navigating through the constantly changing environment. The more I know that you're protected, the more I know that I'm protected. Finally, I've identified my top 4 recommendations that I feel any business should be doing. Find a champion or 2 at your organization to help drive the message of cybersecurity hygiene consistently. I'm often considered the chief reminder officer or the chief annoyance officer, but I'm okay with that. Risk assessments of your vendors should always be done. Knowing which of your vendors have customer information, which have employee information or other confidential business information will help you determine what this should include. Remember, a cloud is just someone else's computer. It doesn't mean that it's safe. For those vendors that are critical to your business operations, ask them for due diligence packet annually and review that. Most vendors will know what you mean when you ask for it, but traditionally that will include their financials. If they're a private company, you may not get that. Their insurance policy, their SOC reports, those SOC reports, that shows how well their controls are in protecting that information by an outside auditor, what their cybersecurity policy is, and what their disaster recovery testing results are. And do an IT audit that will help the expert determine where your largest risks are and helps you with keeping your plan up to date. As a bonus, cybersecurity insurance policy. Please do not think that this will be your cybersecurity plan. You need to understand truly what it covers. This should not be the only thing that you do. Okay, so I have included my email. If you're on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connection request, or if you actually hold your phone up to the screen, that QR code should open, take you right to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect there. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Gail Betcher, who's the VP of our Treasury Management area, to talk about some people-specific stuff. Take it away, Gail.
Thank you, Tim. This was valuable information today. Tim gave some great tips on cybersecurity best practices that you may want to implement in your business. People State Bank has additional fraud protection services available to you that you can add onto your business deposit accounts. ACH Blocks and Filters and Positive Pay are both real-time monitoring for your deposit accounts. ACH Blocks and Filters protects against electronic fraud. Businesses may not be aware that you have 24 hours to dispute an electronic debit that may hit your account. This program, ACH Blocks and Filters, provides decision-making of an item that's hitting your account within that 24 hours. Positive Pay, another program available to protect you against check fraud, will allow you to upload a file to the bank and have the bank decision or see those checks as they come through to make sure they're issued to the correct person that you've issued them to. We have seen a lot of fictitious checks created on business accounts in the last several months. Just last week, we had a customer with 52 checks totaling over $19,000 clear their account. They now have this program in place and are protected from this type of check fraud for future. If you have any questions about today's presentation or are interested in implementing People State Bank's fraud protection programs, please contact your banker or the Treasury Management team. Thank you again for joining us today and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.